Blade, a guy with different hair color, came to the academy. He was glad that people around him didn't suspect that he wasn't ordinary. Blade's main goal was to fit into the society, and then he would definitely become the most ordinary person. People around noticed that the guy was acting a little strange, for Blade kept looking from side to side. One girl assumed that he was new, because she hadn't seen him in the academy before. Blade noticed the guys looking at him and began to approach. The girl with purple hair was frightened by this sudden action. As the guy approached her, he shouted loudly that his name was Blade. The startled girl said her name was Claire and it was nice to meet you. Then the guy introduced himself again. The guys didn't understand why he was acting so weird. Blade told the guys that he came here to make new friends. The guys were a little surprised that he was acting so interesting. One of the guys asked him if he knew what this place was. It was Rosewood Academy, and it was created with the purpose of raising heroes to protect the world. Only those with talent and true ability can get in. The guy shouted to Blade that this academy is for training the elite and only strong abilities decide everything here. Blade was surprised that this guy was yelling at him like that. Then the guy took his hand in his hair and told Blade that even though the world has been calm since the hero defeated the Demon Lord, no one knows when the next crisis will happen, and this place is for preparing for that event. The guy said that it was surprising enough that he had come here to make friends, but everyone was willing to be friends and introduce themselves. It turned out that his name was Kasim. The guy next to him was Clay and the girl with short hair was Jessica. Claire held out her hand to Blade and mumbled that it was a pleasure for them all to meet him. The boy was overjoyed and frantically shook his hand. While they were getting acquainted, someone shouted sternly in the hallway, asking what they had going on. A very powerful girl was walking down the corridor. She asked the guys what they were doing in the middle of the academy. Jessica said fearfully that the best student of the academy was approaching them. Her name was Arnest Flaming. Everyone around them called her the Empress of Fire. Arnest Flaming is the next head of the Flaming family, one of the 4 prestigious families that are known as the 4 swords dedicated to the royal family. And on top of that, out of the 3 classes that are categorized into A, B, and C, she is at the top of the A class. Blade was shocked. The girl approached them and asked what they were doing in the middle of the hallway and told them that since they were students of the academy, they should already strive to be disciplined in their actions. She wanted to continue the moralizing, but Blade jumped up to her and introduced himself. The girl looked at Blade suspiciously, not understanding why he was acting like this. The girl leaned over to Blade and mumbled in a rough voice that his face seemed familiar to her. The boy didn't move an inch away from her because he wasn't at all afraid of her menacing appearance. Arnest was called by one of the girls and she said that everyone in this academy should stop using herself. Then Claire apologized and explained that Blade was a transferred student. This news surprised Arnest a lot. She suddenly began to shout that entering this great academy in the middle of the year is unprecedented, and moreover, a rude and irresponsible person without any apparent ambition will not even be able to enroll here. Blade said he was motivated. After all, he wanted to be friends with her. Arnest was shocked at that answer, for she had expected anything but that. The other guys were also stunned. Arnest replied that he might as well make friends with the stupid guys like him in the hospital, and then swung her fist with all her might. She made the blow, however, Blade dodged so quickly that it was barely noticeable. Arnest felt that she hadn't hit the guy and realized that he had dodged. Blade grinned at her and asked what was wrong. The guys who were watching the scene were shocked, because Arnest's punch was really strong and dangerous, but the new guy was able to dodge it. Arnest herself was dumbfounded. The boy put his hands in his pockets and asked Arnest if she could tell him where the headmaster's office was. Arnest was furious, because Blade was behaving as promiscuously and rudely as possible. However, she did lead Blade to the principal's office. The girl knocked on the door and shouted that she had come for the reason that she had found a lost child who was about to cry. The boy reminded her of her name, however, the toss shut him up. The man in the office mumbled that they were allowed in. It was a man with long hair. When Arnest saw the man, she shouted that it was His Majesty and she didn't expect to see him here at all. When the boys walked in, Arnest asked the man what he was doing here. His Majesty replied that he would be the new principal from this day forward. Suddenly Blade yelled out that he did this, then Arnest took him by the neck and bent him over, yelling that His Majesty himself was in front of him and you can't act like that. Blade looked fearfully at the enraged girl. Arnest began to bow and said that she was honored to be instructed by His Majesty himself, and besides, she never thought she could talk to His Majesty like this. She was madly touched that the fierce ruler himself knew of her existence. His Majesty said enough words. The ruler smiled sweetly at the girl and asked her to leave the office. He explained that he had something to discuss with Blade. Arnest walked out and stood outside the door. She was insanely hurt that the ruler had kicked her out of the office. Arnest was mad that His Majesty only wanted to talk to Blade. She wondered what they would talk about. The girl thought Blade was a weakling, and even if he got into the ranks, he still wouldn't last long. A few days later, Arnest and Blade met again. The boy said hello to her, but she only awed in surprise. The girl asked the boy how he had gotten to the top of the class. Blade said that he had just advanced from a rank to a rank and showed his badge. Arnest said that was impossible. The girl shouted that it was simply impossible to pass to the highest rank in such a short time, and such a thing had never happened. Blade replied that it had happened now. Arnest remembered that he had a conversation with His Majesty just a few days ago, and assumed that he had bribed him. Arnest poked her finger at him and shouted that a bribe was an unfair admission and it was an illegal method. Blade wouldn't listen to her and ran off to the side towards the academy students offering to be friends. Arnest yelled at him to stop and listen to her. The guy suddenly stopped and stopped the girl who was chasing him with his hand. All the guys around who noticed this picture were scared for the Empress, for they were afraid that Blade might hurt her. Arnest felt that Blade started stroking her head and swung her sword at him, shouting that he was not allowed to stroke her. The girl started to shake with anger as the guy dodged the blow again. Blade asked why he couldn't stroke his friend's head. Arnest looked at Blade with surprise and asked who he considered his friends. The guy said he considered her his friend, because at least he knew her name. A girl with a sad expression looked at Arnest and Blade. When the Empress noticed her, she said that the instructor had been waiting for them for a long time. Blade saw the girl and immediately introduced himself. The girl looked at him with eyes full of incomprehension. Arnest explained to her that he wanted to know her name, to which the girl asked if that was an order. Arnest explained to the guy that this girl is always like this. No matter what he says to her, the answer will be the same. Then the guy introduced himself again, as if he didn't understand the words of the Empress. The boy looked at the girl with eyes full of hope, and it so happened that she finally said her name. Her name was Sophie. Arnest, hearing this, could not believe that Sophie voluntarily gave her name to someone. It had never happened before. Then the girl assumed that Blade was hiding something. The instructor wanted to start the class. However, Arnest came running to him and offered to test the new student. She wanted to reveal his secrets in this way, but the instructor replied that he would hold the lesson. Then Arnest drew her sword and asked the instructor again about testing Blade, and then he agreed. The girl tossed the guy the sword. She explained to the guy that he has to destroy the armor that is next to her. Everyone is doing it as a test, which means that he can too. At the same time, everyone will look at his abilities. However, if he fails, he will be out of this class. Blade looked at the girl in surprise and then looked at the sword and said with a smile that he was ready for anything. Arnest asked the boy if he realized the significance of it, because this class is in a different dimension from the others. Then Blade asked how many dimensions they are different. The girl thought it was a strange question but replied that there was a 3-dimensional difference. The boy began to scream, letting out a breeze that surrounded him. Arnest was shocked, because she had heard that this technique could only be used by the strongest, who had followed the dragon line and had killed dragons themselves. A large white dragon appeared near Blade. The guy directed this dragon into the armor that needed to be destroyed, and there was a powerful explosion. From the intense heat of the clothes on Arnest burned through, and in the wall that was behind the armor was punctured. A huge hole was formed. Arnest was terrified. She didn't understand what had happened. A little later, when Blade was talking to His Majesty, the ruler said that he wanted him to regain his powers. Blade didn't hesitate to reply that he didn't want to do that. The ruler got upset and asked why he didn't want to. Isn't he happy here? Blade replied that he was happy here. Then His Majesty said that this would be a good opportunity for rehabilitation. The students here are great. They will be a good source of motivation for him, especially since the curriculum is about to change. The ruler said that the teaching methods here are too lenient. At this rate, only heroes like Blade himself will grow up. Blade jumped up from his desk and shouted that he wanted to be a normal person, so he was going to make 100 friends, especially since he had said more than once that his powers were over. The ruler replied that he just didn't believe him. He was sure that Blade would definitely get his powers back. The guy wanted to say something, but the ruler interrupted him. He said that if Blade asked why he would still get his powers back, he would say that Blade was a real hero. The ruler replied that if the power that was lost in the battle with the Demon Lord was as much a part of the hero, then that power would surely return. Blade realized that His Majesty was simply not hearing things. Blade waved his sword that Arnest had given him and said that it was hard enough to use, especially since it was weak. After a moment, the sword crumbled. The guy looked back at the guys who were looking at him with frightened eyes. Arnest asked who he was, to which Blade immediately replied that she was definitely wrong in her assumptions. Blade began to shout that he was the most ordinary person. There were no peculiarities about him. He began to get nervous, as everyone around him looked at him with cold eyes. A little later everyone went to lunch. Blade was eating his lunch and talking about how the pork cutlet with curry was delicious. He thought that the man who had created such a combination was a genius. Suddenly, Arnest jumped up from the table and asked who he was. Blade excitedly replied that he was a perfectly ordinary man. Blade saw Cassim, Clay, Claire, and Jessica and called them over to have lunch with him, but they only apologized to him and walked away. It turned out that only Blade was sitting at the table with Arnest, although there were plenty of empty seats around. Blade suddenly asked Arnest if she was being abused and if so he could help her. The girl said he was very stupid. Arnest mumbled that she apologized for her words that she said earlier about his illegal enrollment. The girl hesitated and apologized to him again. Blade didn't know what she was talking about and asked if it was true. Arnest shouted that she had said those words to him and they must have hurt him. But the guy said he forgot about it because it didn't bother him. Blade said that more than that, he was insanely grateful to her because she really saved him at that moment, because he was new and dreamed of making friends here. Arnest was surprised that he was saying that seriously. The guy smiled embarrassedly and said that weren't they friends if they were having lunch together right now. Arnest was surprised and mumbled that he was stupid. However, they could really be friends. The students around them marveled that the Empress was so simple. Toward evening, Arnest returned home. She undressed and sat down on her bed with a heavy sigh. She remembered the incident that had happened the other day during the tests. If it had been known what Blade had done, there would have been a lot of trouble. And so the normal students were told it was a mysterious explosion, so there would be no questions asked. However, this is the skill of a hero. Having seen it before her eyes, it is worth recognizing that he is an unusual person. She was angry that she had started befriending Blade. After all, to befriend her you have to have great power, not be some kind of fool. She collapsed on the bed frustrated. She was upset that she had to be friends with him, even though she didn't really want to be friends with him at all. She rolled side to side on the bed, trying to sleep, but nothing worked. She suddenly jumped up from the bed and looked at her sword called Asmodius. The girl got up, went to the sword and realized that she most likely lost her guard. However, she is the next head of the family, and she must always be the best, because those born in this house cannot afford to be anything but the best, because their life is the life of the strongest. It is the destiny of prominent houses. Follow this principle, and that is the fate that awaits her. The girl took her sword and mouthed that she possesses this demonic sword while wielding Asmodius. The sword forced its owner to give herself to it. The girl suddenly remembered her parents' words that she will be the next head of the prestigious noble who serves the royal family, because being the greatest is his duty. However, everyone around her thinks that she is very arrogant and is very different from normal people. The sword again forced the girl to give herself to him. Then she shouted for him to shut up, for she must be strong and cannot be influenced. The next day the students were gathered in the arena. Blade asked the ruler if there was going to be a tournament. The ruler replied that he just wanted to make sure that his training was good. After all combat training practice, it is a good opportunity for those who also aspire to be heroes. Arnest approached the ruler and said that it was a great honor to be seen by the headmaster of the academy himself. The ruler said that he had prepared a reward for the winner. The ruler shouted that he was ready to give the winner of the tournament the right to learn from the hero himself. Blade was very surprised at that. He choked on his saliva. The students around him were madly surprised that the winner would get the right to learn from a real hero who had defeated a demon lord. The ruler explained that he and this hero were close friends and he would fulfill any request he made. Blade was angry that the ruler was saying whatever he wanted. It turned out that it was the ruler's plan to make sure that Blade would definitely win. Arnest said she understood the terms of the tournament. Arnest bowed to the ruler and said she would take care of pairing up for the tournament. Everyone else would follow the list and participate. Blade asked the other students why Arnest was always taking everything on herself and how reliable the instructors were. She was still a student. One guy came up to him and asked if he had forgotten one rule. That ability in this academy decides absolutely everything, so it's only natural that she, as the best, can dictate the curriculum. Blade asked who was even talking to him. The guy said he was the most attractive young nobleman in the class, Leonard. Blade said he didn't remember him at all. Leonard then replied that he should know at least a little about him anyway. However, Blade replied that he was seeing him for the first time. Arnest explained the rules, that they must fight seriously and at full strength. The tournament began. Blade defeated 3 opponents in a row. After the battles, Blade made it to the final round. Blade himself thought about the fact that he was in full control of his strength and looked like an example of a normal person. The guys around him were speculating about how Blade was insanely strong, because he had 3 wins in a row. When the guy heard that, he realized that he stood out. Leonard walked up to him and called out to him. He told Blade to look in the direction where Sophie and the Empress were getting ready to fight. Blade was worried about Sophie because she was unarmed and therefore at a disadvantage, but Leonard explained that even unarmed she was considered the second strongest student. The fight between Sophie and Arnest began. Arnest aimed her sword at Sophie, but Sophie dodged it perfectly. Sophie decided to attack with her fists, but Arnest blocked the first fist with her sword. Blade noticed that Sophie was really good against the sword. She fought Arnest on equal footing. Leonard pointed out that he was wrong after all. When they looked at the girls, it was clear that Arnest was doing better. Leonard said that absolutely no one could beat her. Arnest raised her sword and started using some technique. She delivered a powerful blow, in the place of which a hole appeared. Sophie was able to dodge it. Blade was scared that Arnest was trying to kill her. Arnest put her sword to Sophie's neck, and then the unarmed girl said she was surrendering. Blade breathed out in relief when he realized Sophie was alive. He should have remembered that this was just combat training and not a real fight. If it was a real fight, it wouldn't be any different from the ones in the Age of Heroes. Back then he had many battles where killing was commonplace. However, that didn't mean he was doing it by choice. The guy shouted that he was glad to be in this academy and he was a perfectly normal person. Arnest walked up to Blade and said that it was time for the final round. Blade waved his hands and said that their lives were not at stake. Arnest replied that she shouldn't mess with her head because she was challenging him to a serious fight. After all, if he had the technique, he would do it too. After these words, dark magic enveloped the sword. Blade crossed his arms on his chest and said that not that this skill was so all important, but he was ready for a fight. The guy noticed Arnest twisted in pain and asked if she was alright, for she looked very tired. He wanted to suggest that she rest, however she yelled that he was a fool. She opened her eyes wide and said that unlike him she didn't have a clear reason why she had to go first, she just couldn't play him. The girl raised her sword and noticed the black magic engulfing him. Consternation appeared in her eyes. Immediately she passed out as Arnest started to fall. Blade ran up and caught her. When he saw that the girl was unconscious, he yelled that she needed help and asked where the infirmary was. Leonard showed the direction. The guy brought the girl to the nurse's station and she was examined. She continued to lie unconscious. The doctor said her condition was far from good. The doctor explained that if it was an illness or injury she could cure her. However, she didn't know how to deal with magic. Blade nervously mumbled that she should not give up because she had saved him from death after he had defeated a demon lord. But the doctor replied that magic was not her field and there was nothing she could do to help Arnest. Blade unbuttoned his shirt and the doctor had a view of his torso. She mumbled that his body had become quite nice. It looked like his progress was going smoothly, but he still shouldn't overpower himself. After all, if Blade used even 10% of his past strength, he would probably die. The guy replied that he wasn't going to use it. After all, he was a normal person and didn't need it. He asked the doctor to remove the strange things on his body. The doctor replied that it was the result of him losing his power, so there was nothing she could do about it, and if he played with his life again he would pull them out. Blade was scared. The doctor asked Blade that the girl he brought was the daughter of the Flaming family who serves the king. The lad replied that it was worth asking his majesty. Suddenly Arnest woke up and opened her tired and lost eyes slightly. Arnest sat up on the bed and held her head and asked where she was. Blade explained to her that she had recently fainted and had just woken up. The girl said she didn't remember that. The girl began to twist violently from side to side out of excitement. Then Blade grabbed her shoulder and put her back in bed to calm down. Arnest looked at the guy and asked if she had done something terrible. Blade replied that she had just fainted, but dragging her back here was a little difficult. The girl resented him for being so rude. The doctor told the girl to get some rest, however Arnest suddenly yelled for them to stop. Arnest jumped up from the bed again, and getting up from it said that she was perfectly fine. The doctor made her lie back down, but she didn't listen at all. Blade started to worry about the doctor and said that maybe Arnest really was getting better and she could be released. The doctor was angry that Blade called her madam. The guy explained that he said that because she looked like a teacher. He promised her that nothing would happen to Arnest. The doctor sat down at her desk and let Blade go with Arnest. The girl and the boy were walking down the hallway. Blade told her that she shouldn't keep things to herself. However, she replied that everything was perfectly fine. Then suddenly she stopped because Blade was blocking her passage. He said that friends should consult each other at a time like this and asked if he was wrong. The girl clenched her fists and said he shouldn't worry about her, and most importantly no one should know that she fainted today. Arnest left and Blade remembered the conversation with the doctor about His Majesty decided he had no other choice. The boy found the secret archive of the royal library. Blade was amazed that the king would hide it in a place like this. From the archives he learned that they called the demon sword Asmodius. After reading the archives, Blade understood the situation. However, he was now indebted to His Majesty for giving him the key to the library. As for what he was going to ask for later, he said he was willing to put up with it for the sake of the friend he had finally made. In the evening, Arnest called Blade to talk to her alone, which surprised the guy. The girl asked him if he would threaten her because of her position as the best in the academy. Blade said he wasn't going to do that, he was just interested in her. Arnest suddenly screamed that she wasn't going to go that far. Blade started to calm her down and told her that she had it all wrong. He suddenly grabbed her wrist. Blade moved closer to her ear and mumbled that he knew the secret of her sword. Arnest's eyes went wide with surprise. Blade told her that this demonic sword had a mind and consciousness of its own, and it would offer absolute strength and power to its wielder, and those it deemed worthy. However, the power he had seen in training in real combat, it was even greater. Arnest only uses a small portion of it, so as the wielder of this sword, it was in an incomplete state. Blade asked the girl if it was true that her family had always owned this sword, and why then she was having problems. Arnest mumbled that the demonic sword Asmodius had been kept since the previous owner died. She was 6 years old then. She wanted to catch a glimpse of the sword that had been told about for generations, so she sneaked a look at it. She looked at it standing in the glass display case and touched it, not realizing it was cursed. As soon as she touched him, she was surrounded by streams of dark magic. She was greatly frightened. To be enveloped by a sword realization that craved blood and carnage was incredibly terrifying to her 6 years old. In reality, someone who had prepared their body, spirit, mind, and possessed the talents of a hero should have challenged the sword. For days she lay on the floor on the verge of death, the sword trying to take control of her mind. Since then, she has constantly suppressed her urges, held back from the desire for the sword, and her red hair is the result of that fight with the sword. Originally it was black, however after 7 days and nights, it became so. Arnest had heard that this had never happened in the time of the first owner, and that sword had found her rather than her finding it. Blade said that she had no control over that sword at all. Arnest replied that she was rather stubborn in that regard. However, she was the next head of House Flaming, and could not afford to let the sword take over her body. Blade wondered if that had been since she was 6 years old. That meant she had endured all that suffering for over a decade. Blade remembered that the archival records described a method of subduing the power of this sword. He told Arnest that her problem could be solved. He said that there was only one way to subdue it. Arnest replied that she must make it recognize her as its master, however she might fail. Blade replied that she would be fine. Blade said that even if something were to happen, as her friend, he would end the matter. He looked at Arnest and asked if she thought he was capable of doing such a thing. She paused for a long pause and replied that if it was him it would most likely work out. The guy asked if she had any more questions. Arnest exhaled and replied that there were no more questions. Arnest and Blade walked into the arena. The girl took the demon sword with her. She raised it and began to shout that she was Arnest Flaming, wished to make a pact with it. In accordance with an ancient rule, she asked the sword to accept her summons and test her. Sword replied that he didn't mind doing that. Suddenly there was chaos. It looked like a tornado had formed in the girl's place. Blade said that from now on she was on her own. She had to overcome the Asmodius within her. He said he believed in her and Arnest replied that she believed in him as well. The girl fell into the sword consciousness. Her body was completely bare. A monster appeared in front of her, which was Asmodius himself. He told her that he was born to kill, destroy, and ruin. Arnest said she wanted to get straight to the point and told him to obey her. Asmodius replied that he refused. Then the girl offered him a deal. She held out her hand to him and told him that when necessary she would allow him to destroy, kill, and destroy. In order to protect what she had to, he would just be a force. Whether that force was needed for good or bad was up to her to decide. Asmodius replied that he refuses anyway. After all, she is still a child, and will just stun her. Arnest asked him if his pride would not allow him to lose to a woman, that he prefers men. Asmodius replied that gender doesn't matter. Then the girl asked if she annoys him. Asmodius said that he is a flame and a force. He is the embodiment of violence that dominates all destruction. Arnest said that he talks too much about himself and called her to follow her. Suddenly, Arnest was back in the world to Blade. She screamed like a furious person that she wanted to destroy everything in her path, kill and burn. Her mouth was wide open. She stuck out her tongue and mouthed that she was very pleased. Blade was scared for the girl but mouthed that he still believed in her. Suddenly Arnest wondered why she was persisting again. She had always tried but she didn't know why. What was she doing it for? Not for her family or her friends, especially since she didn't have any. She thought about the fact that even if she started to persevere, she suddenly remembered that she had recently made a friend and it was because of him that she was fighting now, so it would be okay if she failed. At worst, he could finish the job. Suddenly her judgment changed. She decided that she had to keep fighting. After all, she was the only one who could solve this problem. She fell so deep into her consciousness that she wondered what she was. She wondered if the connection to her family had anything to do with her honor and pride. Arnest decided it was all wrong. She decided that she was not tied to anything. She owed it to herself to make her own choices. She belonged to herself. The girl drew her sword. Asmodius became angry. Grabbing the sword, the girl shouted that she was Arnest flaming. Suddenly she started to be thrown out of consciousness by Asmodius. The girl collapsed on the ground in front of Blade. He grabbed her and asked if she was alright. The tired girl smiled and mumbled that she was able to win. Kai smiled and said that it was meant to be since he believed in her. Dai sincerely congratulated Arnest on her return. They were in the arena. The girl pointed her spear at Blade. The young man just dodged it. The hero stabbed the girl in the stomach. Blade said how peaceful it was here. He slung his sword on his shoulder. The girl thought that there was no way she could beat him. The young man thought that this is how hard he practiced, just like a normal student. The hero was called out. It was Arnest. She told Blade to stop acting like this and do things properly. She added that the hero was being too rude to the teacher. Blade looked at his acquaintance and thought about it. Blade asked Arnest if it seemed to him or if she had changed a bit. The girl looked embarrassed. She turned her back to him. Blade continued to stare at Arnest. He apologized to the girl for not knowing what had changed. Those present were shocked. An annoyed Leonard asked Blade what he had trouble noticing when the girl changed her hair. Blade started to get nervous. He replied that that was what had changed. Leonard yelled that he wasn't allowed to say that. He pulled out his sword and was going to fight Blade. Blade asked why Leonard was angry. Arnest folded her arms across her chest. She asked Blade that since he had nothing better to do, could he look after her. The hero asked who to watch out for. Arnest pointed to a person. Blade said she meant her. It was Sophie. The girl was practicing. Someone asked why she was training alone. The interlocutor replied that she had always been like that. He added that if ordered to, she would do it, but she never did anything of her own free will. Arnest told Blade that it was different with him, however, because she had given her name to him of her own free will. The girl added that something like that had never happened before. Blade hesitated for a moment. The hero said that he was now recalling Sophie. Arnest said that she wished she had thought and acted on her own. She continued that she was leaving that on him. Arnest reprimanded Leonard. She asked that he was having stamina problems. The girl ordered him that from now on he should run 10 kilometers every day until he died. Leonard interjected her. Blade asked under his breath that she was giving out errands like that. The young man folded his arms across his chest. Blade walked up to Sophie. He greeted her and introduced himself. The girl replied that she knew that. The hero continued that he had been told by Arnest to follow her workouts. He offered to do them together. Sophie asked if that had been an order. Blade froze with surprise. Blade shook his hand. He replied that it was true that he had asked her, but it hadn't exactly been an order. The hero added that he just wanted to help her because they were friends. Sophie put her fist forward. She said that was all she knew. The girl added that she hadn't been taught anything else. Blade said that he would teach her how to wield a sword then. The young man asked her how about that. Sophie asked him if that was an order. Blade looked nervous. The girl looked at him with a questioning look. The hero answered in the negative. He added that it was just a friendly favor. Blade drew his weapon. The young man continued that that was why, if she didn't want it, he wasn't going to force it. He said that he wanted to help her with her training. Blade asked that it wasn't a problem. Sophie hesitated. She brought her fist to her chin. The girl agreed with him. Blade rejoiced. He wanted to say something, but Arnest interrupted him. She shouted to the entire arena that that was it for today. Blade asked her if she could give him 5 more minutes. Arnest became angry. She replied that they were done for tonight. Sophie stood and watched the whole thing. Sophie smiled. Blade noticed the change in Sophie's face. He thought she might have been smiling. After class, they were in the arena. Blade suggested they start simple. The hero said he didn't need to hold it tight. He told Sophie to put the strength in just her pinky finger. The young man continued that the rest of her fingers just had to encompass it, or she wouldn't be able to wield it freely. Blade showed her how the sword was to be held and used. The girl took the sword and was going to try it. Sophie practiced wielding the sword. Blade said that it was correct. He continued by saying that she was a fast learner. The hero added that he thought her sword wielding was good enough. Sophie asked that she could have defeated Arnest. Blade replied that he didn't even know. He figured that Arnest was the result of incredible talent and training. The hero suggested that it could have taken years to do such a thing. Sophie threw her sword from behind Blade. She was behind him in an instant and caught him off guard. Sophie grabbed him by the neck and threw him to the ground. The girl sat on top of Blade. She said she was stronger. Sophie smiled. Blade was surprised. He smiled as well. The hero thought her heart was beginning to open. Sophie asked him if he could teach her how to wield a spear. Blade had agreed. In the palace, there were many stacks of papers on the table. The man asked how life flowed at the academy. He asked if anything good had happened. He was in a good mood. Blade shouted at him not to call him out in the middle of class in the first place. Blade sipped his tea. He said he had made friends. The man replied that it was a good thing. He told Blade that he had been a hero since he was 3, so he didn't have time for friends. The man continued that he could at least call him his friend. He added that it was very rude. Blade became angry. He apologized loudly for it. The man leaned on his hand. He continued that he thought Blade would be able to make friends his own age here, so he suggested that he come here. The man added that he was glad that he wasn't alone now. Blade stammered. He asked Blade what kind of friends he'd made during that time. The hero replied that Sophie had. The man repeated the girl's name. He said she was strong. Blade quietly agreed with him. The man continued that she had problems among the residents, so he enrolled her here. The hero replied that, in that case, it was better for her to be here. The man said that even though she was strong, she was still flawed. He continued that it was considered necessary to surpass the human mind, and only 10% showed it in practice. The man told Blade that, after all, the completed version was meant to surpass him. Blade became angry. The man continued that, at this point, it was superior to normal humans. Blade asked what he was talking about. The man replied that he was talking about what she was. The man continued that she was an artificial hero project. Blade was puzzled. He asked again. The man asked him that he was a natural hero. He continued that it meant if there was a natural hero, then the man could create an artificial one. The king added that some idiots had come up with something like that. The king said that being a hero was a great power that only this country possessed. He added that he thought it was rather unpleasant for them. Blade replied that it didn't mean he was his property. The king said that he had tried to tell them that, but they had not believed him. He went on to say that in the confrontation, they had stained their hands with ancient, forbidden technology. Blade questioned him. The man answered in the affirmative. King continued that they analyzed people with potential and manifested in them the power of an artificial hero. He said that then, they cloned the successful original, over and over again. The man added that they then experimented by purifying it. King said that to them, it was not a human being. He continued that it was treated like an object. He covered his mouth with his hand. The man added that she didn't have a normal upbringing. King said that her full name was Sophie Femto. He continued that Femto represented the number 12 in the ancient language. The king added that she was therefore the 12th girl named Sophie. Blade did not believe what he heard. You could read in his eyes the horror he felt. Blade wanted to ask something, but the king wouldn't let him. The king said that this group had been completely wiped out, so there was no need to worry. He continued that, however, when he found it, the man remembered their meeting. Then he told Sophie that she was now free. The girl repeated it. He thought that her heart was already closed. Blade thought he would have agreed with an artificial hero, but in order to make her a hero, she had been robbed of the most important thing. Sophie's heart had been stolen, he thought. Blade stood up. He thought, in a nutshell, as an original, it was his fault. Blade had something he wanted to ask the king. The man listened to him intently. The hero was interested in what teenagers his age usually did. The king wondered. He assumed that teenagers enjoyed being young. Blade was surprised. He asked what kind of youth. The king laughed. The man replied that it was inherent in them, after all. He told Blade that he should have known at least that much. The king continued that then he should have listened to the stories of the heroism of his youth. Blade said that if, indeed, there were any. The king began his tale. He said that she was considered out of reach for most, but he would not give up for anything. The man added that, for she was a woman and he was a man. The king screamed. He then pushed her onto the bed and his eyes burned with excitement. Blade was not in attendance. The hero left the king's study. He said he shouldn't have listened to him at all. Blade told himself that he'd better try asking around some more. Blade asked some girls he knew. The first one answered that it was love. The second blushed and replied that it was probably love. Arnest became embarrassed. She replied that she thought it was love. Blade asked Arnest what it was all about. The girl became angry. She asked what he meant by and all. Arnest said that love wasn't such a complicated thing. She went on to say that just talking, shopping, in other words, it was a date. The girl thought that wasn't accurate. Blade replied that it was clear to him. Blade said he understood. He yelled that he was going on a date. Hero thanked Arnest. Blade added that he had done the right thing by deciding to ask her. He left the room. Arnest replied that she didn't have to. She paused for a second. Afterward, the girl shouted, asking him who he was going on a date with. Blade was talking to a classmate. The girl said that Sophie was over there. Blade called out to Sophie. He yelled that it was date time. The girl tried to stop him. The hero opened the door and froze. It was a women's shower. Naked girls were washing themselves. They noticed and became embarrassed. The girls started squealing and screaming. Some of them screamed that Blade was a pervert. They beat him up. Sophie was still naked. The girl leaned over. She asked Blade what the order was. Blade sat up. He replied that it wasn't an order. The hero grabbed Sophie's hand. He added that it was something very important. Sophie smiled. She replied that she understood. In the academy courtyard, Blade was standing off to the side. He was reading a dating guide book. The hero from the sidelines looked very serious. The girls were watching him. One said that Blade Kun ran into the girls' shower room today. Another said that there was a lot of noise. The third added, saying he was being a big ass about himself. The first said that they should have proceeded according to plan. She asked if they had been clear. The girl continued that they were allies now and had an obligation to deal with it. The second agreed. She asked her to be gentle with him. The clock showed exactly 10 o'clock. Blade was approached by Sophie. Blade said exactly the exact time. The girl asked that wasn't that normal. Sophie continued that she would go over their schedule. Blade replied that he had studied it properly, so she had to provide it to him. Blade opened the book and started reading. He said that they were to meet at 10 o'clock. They were to greet each other a minute later, also confirming their plans. The hero continued that at 3 minutes past 10 they were to start walking until 10:30. Before that time there was to be a walk around the city. The young man said that from 10:30 to 11 o'clock they were to rest until noon, at which time they were to have lunch. He added that the rest of the schedule was to be announced after lunch. One of the girls watching him asked if this schedule was too detailed. Another added that it was no longer a date, but an assignment. Sophie listened intently. Sophie said that it was already 4 minutes past 10. Blade shouted that what was he going to do. He repeated about the schedule. Sophie replied that she thought they had to go. Blade said that they would be there by 11 o'clock. He added that they would wait here for now. Sophie replied that it was clear to her. They sat in the cafe. Blade said that they were supposed to have a 10-minute break here. Sophie interrogated him. The girl added that it had been nice. They walked around the city. Blade said that the girls made their decisions by looking at clothes. Sophie replied that she hadn't realized that. Blade said that on a date, they always ordered that. They sat at a table. Hero asked the waiter to bring one tropical delight. The waiter brought it. Blade said the name of the drink spoke for itself. Hero said their next assignment was to drink it together. Sophie replied that it was clear to her. She said she was just supposed to drink it. The girls watched them. One of them said that it was uncomfortable that way, so they had to get closer. Blade looked at Sophie. They were drinking a drink together. Sophie closed her eyes and Blade watched the whole thing. Blade cried out and stepped back. He turned red. Sophie stopped. She asked what had happened. Hero started to make excuses that it was just too close. Sophie said that she couldn't have done the task alone. The girl added that she needed his help. Blade asked himself what it was all about. He clutched at his heart. The young man replied that he understood her. He asked her to hold on for a second. Blade walked over to Sophie. They started drinking the drink together. Arnest watched them. She was shocked. The other two girls were enjoying the drink. Arnest said in a low voice that it was obscene, disgusting, and dirty. She repeated that their cheeks were touching. The other girl called her Anya and said her ice cream was melting. Arnest repeated the new nickname. The girl asked that they were friends and could they call her that. Arnest tried to say something. She said not that she minded. The third girl was surprised. She said that Blade Kun and Sophie had left. Another screamed, asking what they left. She yelled that this was her deepest mistake. Blade and Sophie sat by the fountain. Sophie said that today had been fun. Blade laughed. He replied that she was probably right. Sophie asked if there was something she could ask. Blade replied in the affirmative. Sophie asked why he had done that for her. Blade replied that it was because they were friends. Hero said that was right. He added that they were friends. Blade continued that, so this kind of thing was only natural. He added that he shouldn't have worried. Sophie asked that they were friends. Blade answered in the affirmative. Hero asked that wasn't that obvious. Sophie said that friends didn't have secrets, at least that's what she'd heard. Blade started to get nervous. Sophie fell silent. Afterward, she said that she wanted Blade to listen to her. The hero looked at her with a questioning look. Sophie said that she had been born to be an artificial hero. She continued that she wasn't complete, however, was a failed experiment. She added that she had never met a hero, but the power she had been given was very close to one. Blade thought he knew that Sophie was an experiment, and that was the root of her power. The young man, however, had not thought about the possibility of reproducing a power close to that of a hero. Sophie stood up and began to climb the stairs. She told Blade that he was watching. The girl activated her power. The metal railing began to melt from the girl's power. Sophie said that she could break the laws of physics, but she couldn't fully control it. Beneath Sophie's feet, the rocks deformed. A crater formed. Blade was frightened. Sophie continued that she could increase her weight 1,000 times, but it came out to about 10,000. She said that it was also possible to stop time. The girl added that she could only use these powers for 10 seconds. Blade remained silent. He thought that this power was comparable to that of a hero. Sophie said that Sophisha Femto, the 12th clone named Sophisha, was her. She went on to say that the final sample of the artificial hero project, the only success, albeit limited. Blade remained silent. Afterward, he replied that it was clear to him. The hero thanked Sophie for telling him. He added that he wasn't going to keep secrets either. Sophie looked at him. Blade was nervous. He shouted that he was a hero. Sophie was surprised. Blade continued that he had been a hero, but he couldn't use his powers anymore. He added that he was sorry. The hero told Sophie that he wasn't forgiven for that, and that she was within her rights to resent him. Sophie asked why he had apologized. Blade replied that it was his fault that she had those eyes. He continued that if there hadn't been a hero, Blade fell silent. The young man continued that this power was like a curse. He said that he began to possess it since he was 3 years old. Blade said that, since then, he had risked his life for rigorous training. He said that even so, he couldn't help everyone. The hero continued that cities, people, he could save the world, but he couldn't save everyone. Blade said that, and if he couldn't save someone, they became violent. Sophie's eyes widened. The young man remembered someone asking him why he couldn't save him. He was reminded that he was a hero. Blade thought that someone was a nurtured hero like him. Someone with the same abilities should have been there, but it was just him. He thought that if someone else died like that, someone else would be the hero and he would have to go the same way. All of this kept Blade's mind at ease. He began to cry. He admitted that he never wanted to be a hero. Blade knelt down and grabbed his head with his hands. Sophie walked over to him. The girl called out to him and held out her hand. Sophie knelt down as well. She said that even if he never wanted to be one, he was still a hero. The girl reached out her hand to Blade's cheek. Sophie said that after she was rescued by the king, she traveled to find out who she was. The girl continued that this was before she was even enrolled in the academy. She added that people, cities saved by a hero, she had seen them. The girl grabbed Blade's face with both hands. She said that he had brought them peace. Sophie continued that to everyone. She added that as soon as the hero was mentioned, their hearts were filled with light and hope. Sophie said that when she heard his story, she realized what she was born to do. She added that she felt that someone needed her. Sophie said that she was happy that she had been born an artificial hero, so he needed to be proud of it. She gave Blade a hug. The girl continued that his time as a hero had not been in vain. She added that that was why he needed to be proud of it. Blade stopped crying. Blade pulled away. He agreed with her. The young man continued that he wasn't going to worry about being a hero anymore. Sophie replied that it was a good thing. She added that it was their secret. Blade agreed with her. The friends began to smile. Blade looked at his watch. He yelled that it was about to be curfew. The hero added that they needed to hurry. Sophie replied that if they ran now, there was less than a 1% chance that they would make it in time. Blade said that even 1% was enough. He extended his hand to the girl. The hero added that they would make it together. Sophie smiled. They ran, Sophie said, as expected of a hero, in the underground prison of Rosewood Academy. Behind the bars was a menacing creature. The girl called out to him. She said it was about time to eat or he would starve to death. The girl continued that he wouldn't be able to eat while he was wearing this. She said she would take it off now. The prisoner was wearing shackles. The girl removed the muzzle. She said he could eat now. The monster opened its mouth and was about to shoot her. The girl tried to calm it down. The monster released fire and destroyed the grate. The girl managed to dodge it. The students sat in the cafeteria. Arnest asked Claire that she was eating only vegetables again. She asked that she was going to be okay. Claire replied that she was on a diet now because she was getting fat fast. Leonardo disagreed with her. He said that she looked fine as it was, being such a cutie. The other girl asked Arnest if she could introduce her to that handsome man. She added that he had a funny attitude about everything. Blade was here, too. He exclaimed that it was delicious. Hero added that those curry cutlets were so delicious. Sophie told Blade that his whole mouth was dirty. The girl wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. Arnest yelled that she didn't dare flirt in the dining room. She continued that he was always breaking the code of conduct. A student sitting at another table asked his friend if it seemed to him that that side had gotten busier. The friend agreed with him. Arnest said she had a gift for Claire and Jessica. She pulled out a cake. Arnest congratulated them on their array. The girls rejoiced. Arnest continued that they were supposed to get the paperwork to prove it soon. She added that they shouldn't have forgotten to warn Kasim and Clade. Jessica agreed. They ate cake. Claire said that she would get fat if she ate sweets. She added that just this one, last time, and then she would hold back. The girl started eating a piece of cake with great appetite. Claire said there was a banana in the cake. The girl continued that she had tasted it once. She said that to think that there was something delicious in this world. Claire exclaimed that she had missed that feeling so much. Blade asked her not to talk with her mouth full. Arnest asked Blade if he had heard about it. Blade asked that he had heard about what. Arnest replied that it was about combat training against real magical monsters. Arnest said that in order for them to get combat experience against non-humans, a pretty strong, magical monster was captured. Blade asked, that's what it was like. It continued to eat. Arnest said that, and that was his entire reaction to such news. Blade said the suggestion of doing this kind of training was in keeping with this old man's style. Arnest shouted that he was being too rude to his majesty. Something caught Blade's attention. In the dining hall, the students began to scream in fear. The friends stood up. Arnest asked what was going on. Blade told Arnest to take everyone to a safe place. Arnest called out to all the students. They came running. There was an angry monster in the cafeteria. Blade asked if it was the same monster Arnest was talking about. The hero looked at his dish. He asked himself that it was only a child. What was he supposed to do? The guard called out to him. He said that it was too dangerous here, so he needed to get out of here. One guard asked the other what they needed to do. He added that they could not defeat him, so the only thing left to do was to report to the king. The other agreed with him. The monster roared at Blade. Arnest told Blade that everyone had been evacuated. She added that she would help him. Blade replied that he shouldn't have. He said that it wasn't a problem for him, so she should have just stayed out of the way. Arnest looked at him with a questioning look. Blade jumped and took off. He gathered all his strength into a fist. The hero ordered the monster to lie down. The young man delivered a blow to the monster's head. The monster lost consciousness. Blade also threw the plate. After the blow, he caught the plate with his lunch. He said that it was finished. Everyone present was shocked. Arnest asked what he had done. She explained that they were becoming docile after a little beating. The girl added that it was like that with dragons. Blade replied that he shouldn't have been so afraid. It was just a baby dragon. He added that it was probably just out of fear. The hero asked that maybe it was just hungry. Arnest shouted that wasn't what she meant. Blade crouched down in front of the dragon. The dragon opened its maw and the hero threw his plate to him. The dragon started breathing fire. He asked the dragon what was sharp. One student asked another that, did he really? He had just defeated the dragon all by himself. The other replied that he had never heard of anyone defeating a dragon by themselves. Blade was still squatting. One thought he did it in literally a second. This student asked himself if that was normal. Blade shouted that it was just a small dragon. He added that it was weakened after being captured. Everyone present looked at him. Arnest thought that even if it was like that, it would take a moment to dispose of a dragon. She realized that a normal human was not capable of such a thing. The girl thought that he didn't use the Dragon Eater skill. He was straight some super strong being. Arnest realized that she would be completely lost and thought if she let these questions get to her. She screamed that everything was fine. The girl continued to yell for them not to stand as if they were standing still. She offered to clean the place up. Arnest told Blade to help them too. The students began to clean up the mess. The dragon opened his eyes. Arnest told Blade not to stand still. The hero agreed. From behind, the dragon's size began to decrease. Arnest noticed this and went into a stupor. Blade asked something was wrong. Arnest pointed her finger at the dragon. She replied that it was behind him. The hero turned around. The girl pounced on Blade. She called him daddy. The hero didn't expect that. Blade asked who it was. The girl replied that he was her daddy. She said that she had been looking for him for so long. The girl added that she was so happy to see him. Arnest was in a stupor. She asked that this dragon had turned into a little girl. Blade tried to free himself from the girl's grip. He asked who she called daddy. The young man asked if she was mistaken. He also asked if she knew where her parents were. The girl asked that wasn't he here. Blade said that he couldn't reach her. Arnest said that just then, the dragon shrank and turned into a little girl. She asked how that was even possible. Sophie told Blade that she had seen it too. She added that the baby was indeed a dragon. Blade asked that it was serious. Arnest yelled and asked why it was that they had believed it as soon as Sophie had said it. Blade said that he had heard that when a dragon was born, they were getting some serious education. He continued that that was how dragons define their parents. The hero added that, in other words, he had become a father to her in an interesting way. Blade wondered what he was supposed to do now. The girl hugged him again. Everyone looked at them. They were in the shower room. The girl said that the bases of her horns were very sensitive. She asked to be gentle with them. They let Blade take care of her. They bathed. Blade agreed with her. Arnest told him that they couldn't let her start wrecking things around here again. She told Blade that was why he had to watch her. The girl screamed and grabbed the back of her head. She told Blade that it itched there. Blade told Kachulin to behave herself. He started soaping her head. The girl asked why her name was Kachulin. Blade replied that it was simple. He explained that it was the name of a super strong knight who followed his oath without question. The girl replied that that's what it meant. She exclaimed that dragons also followed their oath unquestioningly. There was a knock at the door. It was Arnest. She asked Blade that he was here. The girl said she was going to come in. Arnest saw them in the bathtub. She yelled for him to at least say something. Blade replied that he thought the man who'd opened the door so suddenly was being unreasonable. Arnest tried to change the subject. Blade asked her if she had learned anything. Arnest replied that it seemed that dragons were indeed capable of turning into humans. She went on to say that there was little documentation of this, however. The girl said that even if a magical monster was killed, part of its soul still remained. She continued that then when the remaining part was reborn, it took the appearance of the victorious one to become an even more powerful being. Arnest added that it was like the workings of their primal instincts. Blade asked that she meant to say that a dragon defeated by a human would also take on human form. Arnest replied that, as she had said, it was an extremely rare situation, and he was unlikely to find that many humans capable of defeating a dragon. Blade laughed. He replied that it was for sure. The hero thought, though he knew many who were capable. He asked Arnest how she thought Kachulin had also been killed by a human in a past life. Arnest asked that he had given her a name. She added that the dragon was not her dog. Kachulin exclaimed that Arnest was a brazen woman. She added that she wasn't a doggy. Blade was surprised. Arnest became angry. She screamed, asking that they'd taken a bath together. Blade tried to explain that she didn't know the proper way to bathe. After all, Arnest kicked her foot right in Blade's face. Arnest yelled that he was a horny man. Arnest screamed that she couldn't believe she saw that. She walked out and slammed the door shut. Blade asked why she had hit him. The next day, the students were in the arena. One of the students asked what Blade was doing here. Everyone felt sorry for him. Arnest was angry. She replied that it didn't matter and they needed to leave. Blade was approached by Claire and Jessica. They called out to him. The hero said hello to them. He asked that they had been in this class since that day. Jessica exclaimed that it was their debut in the top class. Jessica asked him what she looked like in those clothes. Blade hesitated for a moment. He replied that she looked like a bully. Jessica started laughing out loud. Jessica asked that today's lesson was in pairs. She leaned over. The girl asked that as an intelligence major, who she was supposed to be paired with. Blade replied that Sophie was a good choice. Jessica called out to Sophie Chan. Sophie asked her back. Claire stood next to Blade. The girl was embarrassed. She asked him that he wouldn't want to be her partner then. The hero replied that if it was okay with her, it would be fine. From the tower, Kachulin was watching them. Blade asked her that there was something wrong. Kachulin told Papa that he kept looking at this grown woman's body. She added that she didn't like it. Claire blushed even more. She asked Blade if that was true. The hero replied in the negative. He shouted that he was only assessing their physical abilities. Kachulin stood and looked at them. Everyone had already found a mate. Kachulin became saddened. Blade turned around and noticed it. He looked at the girl in silence. Blade shouted, asking Kachulin if she would like to join them. He motioned for her to join. Everyone looked around. Claire beckoned for Kachulin to join them as well. She spread her arms out to her sides. The girl came down. Claire smiled at her, but Kachulin looked at her indifferently. Kachulin began to scream. Claire began to panic. Kachulin was going to run away. Claire fell down. Blade called out to Kachulin. The young man said what was causing her to act like that. Blade was in the bathroom. He was washing his face. The hero turned off the water. He opened the door and called out to Kachulin. Blade asked if she was asleep. The young man went into her room. She was not in her room, but the window was open. Blade looked out the window and saw the girl on the roof. He asked Kachulin that something was wrong. The girl replied that she felt calm as she looked up at it. She pointed to something. Blade joined her. They looked up at the night sky. There were 2 moons in the sky. The hero asked what she meant by moons. Kachulin answered in the affirmative. Kachulin explained that the largest moon was the parent and the smaller one was the child. That's why they were together. The girl continued that she always looked at them when she was alone in the wilderness. Blade looked at her. He asked that that's how it was. Kachulin started to smile. She said that he seemed worried that she didn't have any friends. Blade started to get nervous. He asked how she knew about it. Kachulin said that he didn't need to worry. She continued that a dragon's body and spirit were much stronger than a human's. The girl added that they were not used to being together. The girl said be born and die alone. Kachulin added that it was that way or dragons. The girl said that still, it was enough for her to have just her daddy. She snuggled up to Blade. The hero started to get embarrassed. Blade said that Kachulin was a very strong girl. He tried to push her away. The girl replied that he was hurting her. The next moment, Blade hugged her again. Kachulin asked him what she should do with him. She tried to break free from his grip. A few days later in the palace, a man asked who he was mistaken for. He added that this was not a kindergarten for him here. Blade replied that he and the king were the only ones who could raise Kachulin. He spread his hands. The hero continued that by the way, he had ordered him to do whatever the king got into his head since his hero days. Blade asked if it was true that compared to that, it was nothing. The king said he heard him loud and clear. King continued that it didn't matter who Blade saw in him. He added that his love for Blade would never change. Blade didn't like what he said. He told the king to stop because it was disgusting. The king asked where Kachulin was. Just a short time ago, the king was hugging Kachulin. He said that the girl was very sweet. The man added that this was what it was like to be a grandfather. The king's beard touched Kachulin's head. She was in pain. She started to scream. The girl said that his beard would drive her crazy. Kachulin asked what the attack was. The king's nose was wounded. He said then, for his sweet granddaughter's sake, he would shave off his beard. Kachulin ran away. The king told Blade that as he was shaving off his beard, she ran away. Blade started yelling at the king that he couldn't even look after the child properly. The hero called the man a useless king. The king's face changed. He said that feeling of being scolded wasn't so bad. Blade was about to leave. The hero said he was hopeless. He added that he needed to ask someone else. Blade went out into the courtyard. He called out to one of his classmates. Hero asked if she had seen Kachulin. The girl hadn't. Blade looked everywhere for the girl. Blade said he couldn't find her. He asked where she might have gone. The hero went into his room. Kachulin asked him not to intimidate the little dragon. The girl added that she was so unhappy. The young man thought as she went back to her room. Kachulin was playing with the dolls. The first doll looked like Arnest and the second doll looked like Blade. The first doll told Blade's doll that she didn't do it, that she wasn't bullying her. Blade doll replied that it was like he was going to listen to her. Doll Arnest tried to justify herself, but Kachulin started to shake her. Blade asked himself that, was it really Arnest and himself? The hero thought that she really was like a child. The Blade doll replied that it was inexcusable, no way. He told Arnest doll that she was cruel. Blade doll started hitting the other doll. The Arnest doll begged for forgiveness. She promised that she wouldn't do it again. She added that she understood everything well. Doll Arnest told Doll Blade that he was so strong and she wanted to lay eggs for him. Doll Blade replied that he didn't wish that with such a weak fool. The young man watched all of this. He thought her imagination was starting to go overboard. Something caught his attention. Blade noticed a box of toys. He asked himself that she had so many toys. Now a Sophie doll appeared. Blade asked Sophie doll if she could be friends with his daughter. Doll Sophie replied that she understood and that it was easy. Blade continued to watch Kachulin. Kachulin brought the dolls up to her face. Now a Claire doll appeared. The doll said it tickled her. Isekai'd doll told Claire doll that she was so perceptive and she wanted to be tickled too. Kachulin told the dolls that they were so annoying. Kachulin pulled out a Leonard doll. The doll said that there were so many beautiful girls here and he loved every single one in the world. Blade asked himself that it was Leonard. It seemed to him that she liked them. The hero started to laugh. He stepped away from the door. Kachulin pulled out the other dolls. One of them was named Alice. The other doll greeted her. The Alice doll greeted the Gem doll and the little Kachulin doll. This caught Blade's attention. He started watching her again. Kachulin began to call out different names, which included Ilya, Camilla, Marcia, Sarah, Eddie, Cadiz, Mary, Zikis, Alan, Nane, Olga, and Irina. The girl continued to play with the dolls. Blade thought he didn't know these names. He asked himself that these people were from the lower classes. Blade's doll told another doll that he was her daughter's 100th friend. Others began to congratulate him. A third doll said that was awesome and that they were all friends now. Kachulin began to laugh. She hugged her dolls. Blade went into a stupor. Blade walked out of the room. He remembered her saying that it was okay for her to be lonely. The hero thought that it really was okay. The young girl was sad. Blade realized that she wanted to make friends very badly, but he was completely oblivious to it. The hero started to cry. Arnest asked Blade if he had found Kachulin. She continued that if he hadn't, it would be better to search together. The young man tried to say something. He leaned his head against the wall. Arnest asked that something was wrong. Blade screamed that he wasn't worthy of being a father. Arnest started screaming, too. Blade started banging his head against the wall. Arnest screamed and tried to stop him. She screamed that he was bleeding. The wall worked from his blows. Arnest looked at him. Blade's forehead was bloody. Arnest screamed for him to stop. She grabbed him. The girl tried to stop him. Blood appeared on the back of Arnest's palm. Arnest called out to him. The girl was alarmed. Arnest said about his head. She grabbed Blade's face with both hands. She asked what exactly had happened. The girl demanded that he explain more. Arnest said it was clear to her. Blade said that Kachulin wanted to make friends, but couldn't. Arnest asked why. Blade had a bandage on his forehead. He remained silent. The hero remembered the king's words. The king had said that if you wanted to befriend her, you had to defeat her in battle. He continued that the dragon didn't recognize a human weaker than him. The man added that that was what they were by nature. Blade said that only he and the king could do that. He added that there was nothing he could do about it. Arnest said that was true. Arnest said that he should have just trusted her then. Blade looked at her. Arnest asked that he couldn't do everything on his own. Could he? She added that there was another reason for that, too. The girl explained that it was about the incident with Asmodius. She had relied on him. He said that he had helped her with the contract too. Arnest blushed. She shouted he was annoying her. The voice of the demon's sword could only be heard by its wielder. The girl added that it wasn't fair. Arnest said that only she believed in him, but he didn't believe in her. She exclaimed that it was inexcusable arrogance. Blade replied that it wasn't a question of justice. The girl shouted that who cared. She continued that he should have just kept quiet and let others help him. Arnest shouted that he should have let her, or rather them, help him. Blade was surprised. Blade fell silent. He laughed. The hero replied that he understood. The window was open. Arnest exclaimed that it was solved. Blade looked at her again. The girl exclaimed that the battle against Kachulin, so that everyone could become her friend, was beginning. Arnest said that if they wanted to defeat Kachulin, they would still have to get other classes to participate. Blade agreed. He apologized to Arnest for forcing her to help him with it. Arnest replied that it was fine. She said that since they were partners in this battle, it was her duty to be there for him. Blade smiled. He thanked her for that. Arnest became embarrassed. Sword told Arnest that she should have just said honestly that she wanted to be by his side. Arnest blushed. Arnest yelled at the swordsman to shut up. Blade asked what was wrong. Only the sword wielder could hear his voice. Arnest replied that it was only Asmodius coughing. She told Blade that they needed to go. The hero agreed with her. There were apprentices practicing in the arena. Blade and Arnest reached the arena. The apprentices shouted that it was the Empress. They were very excited to see her coming. One of the disciples said that this transferred disciple was also here. The disciple asked what they were doing here. Blade coughed. The hero told the B and C classes that he knew they had training going on right now, but he hoped they would give him a few minutes of attention and listen to him. Blade asked the students what they had all heard about Kachulin. The students remembered the girl. One of the students said it was the dragon that turned into a human after that mayhem. Another student said she was looking at them. A student told Blade that they sometimes saw her when they practiced archery. The second agreed with her. Blade was serious. He said he had a request. The hero asked if they could be her friends. He corrected himself. Blade asked the students that he could ask them to fight her so she would recognize them as her friends. The students began to whisper. Someone asked what he meant. Blade explained that she wanted to be friends with everyone, to the point where she had memorized all of their names. The hero went on to say that to befriend her, she had to defeat her in battle. He said that then she would be able to see them as her friends. Blade bowed to them. He asked them to fight her. The students began to look over at each other. Blade continued that even though she was a young dragon, if they went up against her, someone asked that there was a chance that they could die if they agreed to it. Blade asked them again. Blade shouted that he wished that girl would make some friends. He added that was all he wanted. The hero bowed to the students already on the floor. The students were puzzled. One of them said that even though he said that, another student interrupted. This student shouted that enough of these jokes. The student said it was an honor to be friends with her, but it was too stupid to get involved in a battle where they could lose their lives. One of the students said that indeed, he would rather not die. Another student asked that in truth, how could they win if the best students of this academy couldn't do it? Arnest yelled out what a bunch of losers they were. Arnest asked everyone how they, the students of the Honorable Rosewood Academy, could be such losers. Arnest continued that it was true that this battle was supposed to be dangerous. She added that they could have even died. Arnest continued by saying that he had strived to be the best to defend his country. She asked that they were giving up a little girl's dream to protect themselves. The girl asked that it was true that there were no students in this academy capable of going to such a shameful act. The students listened to her attentively. The students thought for a moment. Arnest kneeled down as well. Arnest said that she had asked them to. She suggested to them that they should fight together. Blade tried to stop her. The apprentices said that even the Empress wanted this. The students from the upper class appeared. The lower class students noticed them and started to get worried. The upper class disciples also knelt down and bowed. They asked the lower class students in one voice. The upper class students asked for them. Blade asked that they all came here. Someone replied that he was too distant from them. Jessica asked that don't friends help each other in times of need. Claire added that everyone was also worried about Kachulin. The students raised white flags. They responded that they understood. One of them asked everyone to raise their heads. He added that they would do their best. The students were in the auditorium. Blade thanked everyone for coming. Blade said there was no time to waste, so they needed to discuss their strategy. Arnest was writing on the board at this time. Claire asked that it was a battle that Kachulin had to win so everyone could be her friend. Blade said that the proud race of dragons only saw a man as their equal if he was stronger than him. He explained that that was why they used force. The hero continued that in order to do that, they had to combine the strength of everyone present. Claire raised her hand and wanted to say something. Claire asked that Kachulin was alone. After all, she explained that they had 100 people on their side. The girl asked that it wasn't a dirty battle. Blade replied that there would be no problem with that. He explained that from what Kachulin knew, humans were a race that fought in groups. He added that so she wouldn't think they fought dirty. The hero said that besides, it was unlikely that anyone here could fight her one-on-one. Claire remained silent. Blade suggested that they should overpower her together. He said that 2 weeks to prepare was more than enough time. The hero continued that he was the chief strategist, and Arnest was to command on the battlefield. Jessica said that she was encouraged that Blade was supposed to be in the battle as well. She added that it seemed to her that it should have been the easiest thing to do. Blade replied that he wasn't going to directly participate in the fight. The students were startled. The hero explained that if he participated and they won, Kachulin wouldn't recognize everyone else as strong. He added that that was why they had to fight without him. The students began to whisper. Blade added that the key to their victory was Claire. Claire was nervous. She asked why she was. The hero replied that her abilities were irreplaceable in battle. Claire said that her restorative powers were. She added that because of them, she was able to get into a class. The girl smiled. Claire said that they were different from normal healing magic. She added that it was a very rare ability. The girl continued that even if a person would lose a limb, her power was able to restore it, along with the armor to its original state, in an instant. She said that was why they could be at ease in a battle with a dragon. Blade said that they would also have the help of the best in the class, Sophie and Leonard. The hero added that an Arnest is their vanguard. Blade said that all three had high offensive power in the academy. He continued that therefore, they were their main force in this battle. Everyone else had to band together in squads to support. Sophie asked what those orders were. She said she understood. Someone said it looked like she was glad she did. Blade said that the grade students were to command the squads, with a total of 3 squads to be formed. The hero continued that when a squad would start to lose more than half of its power, another was to take its place. He added that they were to use the tactic of multiple squads taking turns to wear it down. Blade said that the support should have been responsible for healing the wounded. The young man continued that by doing so, they should have been doing continuous damage to Kachulin, and their attack would have been very effective. Jessica asked Blade that they would definitely be able to overpower her. She said that although she was a child, she was still a dragon. The girl continued that she had heard that their skin was as hard as unrivaled magical steel. Jessica added that they must have been like poking her with needles and could hardly do any damage. Blade told her not to worry. The hero added that he had a plan. Blade continued that he had a chance of success. He added that he just needed them to work together. Within 2 weeks, after discussing the strategy for the upcoming battle, they were in the arena. Blade had been taking good care of Kachulin the entire time, making sure her body was ready for battle. The hero had also been busy rigorously training the 108 students of Rosewood Academy. And now the day had come. The battle between the humans and the dragon was beginning. It was the day of the decisive battle. The king said it was marvelous. The man added that it was a touching story. The king continued that they had to cross swords to become friends. He exclaimed that this is what he called youth. The king said that he was going to watch this performance as a side dish to drink with. Blade replied that they weren't putting on a performance here. Blade stroked Kachulin. He called out to her. The hero told the dragon that she didn't know yet how strong the humans were. He continued that he had heard that she was trapped and put into a slumber by magic and potions, so she didn't have a proper chance to fight. Blade added that that was why she was able to go full out this time and see how strong the humans were. He said that. Plus, he wanted to see how strong she was. Kachulin became enthusiastic. The dragon began to shake her head. Blade asked her to take it easy. He added that he was going to keep an eye on her. The hero continued that she had to try her best. Blade watched the fight. Arnest yelled that it was time. She yelled for them to do it. The students began to shout yes. Each raised their weapons. Blade thought they had high morale. He asked if they were ready. Arnest answered in the affirmative. She said anytime. Blade shouted that then they had to have a match, fair and square. The opponents looked at each other. Blade shouted for them to start. Arnest ordered them to take their seats. The disciples agreed. The disciples lined up around Kachulin. The king was next to Blade. He was laughing. One of the disciples said that the target had been confirmed. The commander ordered an attack. The squad attacked the dragon. Kachulin looked at them. The commander of the other squad shouted that now it was their turn. She activated a spell. The commander used a fire magic spell. The rest of the squad members joined in. They hit Kachulin's head. The king said to spread the 3 squads in different directions and attack her from blind spots. He folded his arms across his chest. The man continued that it wasn't a bad strategy using the numerical advantage. One of the students shouted that they had done it. Another student asked what that was all about. A shadow appeared on them. Kachulin stood unperturbed. The commander asked that there wasn't even a scratch on her. He shouted that a squad change was needed. The king said that it wasn't easy to do even the slightest damage to the dragon. He continued that it would have taken much longer. The man said that the squads were defeated one by one. Kachulin launched fire at the squad. The apprentices covered themselves with a shield, but were terrified. Blade replied that everything was fine. He explained that the squads were acting as bait. The hero continued that it was for their real strike force. He said that they were the ones who decided the outcome of the battle. Leonard drew his weapon. He was ready to fight. Leonard's weapon reached the dragon. He struck. Sophie gathered all her strength in her fist. The girl was about to give the dragon a second blow. Sophie struck. The blow was called a sonic boom. Arnest called out to Asmodius. She struck. The girl asked herself how. The dragon stood in front of her. Arnest thought she didn't even feel him. Leonard stood behind the dragon. Kachulin swung her tail and it flew into the wall. Arnest ordered that they try again. Jessica obeyed. The king said he couldn't look at it anymore. The king said they couldn't have overpowered her after all. Many students were injured. The king leaned on the stone railing. He asked what was supposed to happen next. The man continued that it seemed to him that this was the end for them if things continued like this. Blade remained silent. The king said that the dragon seemed to still be survivable when the human side had lost half of its strength. He asked that they had almost no chance left, after all. Blade looked at him. The young man answered in the negative. Blade explained that Kachulin was also slowly taking damage and weakening little by little. Blade yelled for them to get started. Arnest heard him. Arnest ordered the students to change formation. The students obeyed. The students began to change places. The dragon began to spin around. Kachulin asked herself as they backed away. The dragon saw Sophie. The dragon started growling at Sophie. Kachulin was about to step on Sophie, but she didn't move. The dragon stepped on her. Kachulin fell into the ground. A deep crater formed underneath her. Kachulin began to scream and growl. She tried to get out of the trap. The king exclaimed that it was a trap. He asked that if they had prepared it in advance, what about his words and honesty and fairness? Blade replied that he had misunderstood. The hero said that it wasn't set in advance. Leonard tried to come to his senses. Blade said that it had just been established. The king exclaimed that it was Leonard. The man realized that he had dug through the ground so that it couldn't support her dragon weight and fell through. He asked that all the attacks were to buy it time. The king asked if that wasn't enough to overpower her. He ate an appetizer. Blade turned serious. He said that from this point on, the best part was starting to happen. The dragon almost managed to get out of the trap. Someone shouted that it was trying to get out. Another replied that it was as if he would let it happen. A third yelled for them to be pawed. The dragon screamed and breathed fire. The apprentice yelled for them to hold on. Jessica screamed that she couldn't be allowed to get out. Another apprentice screamed for them to pile on. Kachulin backed away. She had fallen completely into the trap. The dragon was serious. Blade said that it wasn't bad. He added that they were able to drive her back into the pit. The king asked what they were really trying to do. Blade replied that if she couldn't get up, as a dragon with wings, Kachulin would just fly up into the air. The dragon began to rise. Someone yelled that they needed to move away. Blade yelled that they needed to now. He called out for Arnest. Arnest activated the power of her sword. The girl attacked the dragon. She screamed for the dragon to receive. Kachulin collapsed. Kachulin collapsed down. The dragon roared. Arnest called out for Sophie. Sophie flew up from the pit. She said that she had finally been given her orders. Sophie used a super gravity spell. The king exclaimed that it was the power of an artificial hero. Blade ordered Arnest to continue. Arnest said he ordered them as he himself sat back and watched. She grabbed her sword. The girl screamed that in the name of Arnest Flaming, she was ordering him around. She continued to scream for the demonic sword to unleash its powers. Asmodius replied that she had to wait because he couldn't anymore. Arnest told him to stop screwing around. The sword released its powers. A huge ball of magic formed above it. The king exclaimed that it wasn't bad. He said that she was still able to hold the power of the sword. Blade smiled. Blade said that it wasn't just the power of the sword in herself. The students directed their powers towards Arnest. Someone shouted to her that she could do it. Someone else shouted, calling her Empress, that it was all on her. Another apprentice said his power belonged to her. Arnest was having a hard time, but she was coping. The apprentice called her Empress. He shouted that they were counting on her. The squads gathered their forces and marched towards Arnest. Another apprentice shouted for her to take their powers and use them for good. The king said that a tremendous amount of energy was gathering around her. Blade replied that, in other words, they were all channeling all their energy into her. The king replied that it was clear to him. He smiled. Blade said that even though they were weak individually, if they combined their powers, they became a single, powerful force. He added that this was what made people strong. Arnest thought that was right. She mentally asked Kachulin to look at them. This was the strength of the humans. Arnest was about to attack. All the students were screaming. Arnest attacked the dragon. The magic ball flew at Kachulin. The dragon was scared. Kachulin was scared. The orb reached her. A mist enveloped everything around her, behind which nothing could be seen. Kachulin took on her human form. Her body was shabby. Arnest was about to approach her. The team of humans were in a shabby state as well. Many were injured and others were very tired. Kachulin looked at them and began to cry. Blade stroked her head. Kachulin told Blade that she had lost. She added that she had let him down. The girl asked that the weak child had to be thrown away. Blade replied that he hadn't intended to do anything like that. He continued that, besides, she was wrong. Hero said that she wasn't weak. Blade said it was the people who were strong. People looked at the couple. Hero asked what she thought and if she recognized it. Kachulin smiled weakly. Blade asked what it meant that she could be friends with them now. Kachulin started to cry. Everyone around them was happy with the victory. Kachulin said that since it had come to this, I guess she could be their friend. Blade shouted that you couldn't do that. Kachulin started asking the students. The girl was nervous. Kachulin asked the students if they could be her friend. The girl blushed. Blade smiled. The students were happy too. Kachulin suggested that they could be good friends. The students replied that it was a pleasure. Blade looked around and thought that they were practicing together today. This had never happened here before, because all the students in classes A, B, and C were practicing together. The training area here was quite large and resembled a circular arena. The guy noticed that the people had achieved a fine victory in the previous battle, and had already made friends with the Kachulins. Claire hugged the girl with all her might and exclaimed that she was very nice. Kachulin asked her to stop as it was really annoying her. Looking at them, Blade smiled. He also noticed that everyone had gotten stronger after the last battle. They had to take all their powers and use them for good. Now they were free to channel their magic or energy. Some were even able to manifest their martial spirit, spiritual powers, and the like. Since everyone's level had risen, they had a chance to train all together, so everyone here is training hard. Behind the boy, His Majesty appeared. The man grinned and said that from the looks of it, they were doing quite well. The disciples were surprised to see His Majesty here. Blade thought it was strange and assumed he wanted something from them again. Claire asked the hero not to be too rude to His Majesty. The man replied that he had come to check out the place. Seeing how much they had grown, he had an idea for a new training program. The hero didn't know what he meant, but he had a bad feeling about it. Claire reminded him that he was being very rude. His Majesty put his hands up and said that from now on, the entire training ground would undergo renovation. Everyone was shocked by such a statement and couldn't believe their ears. The man exclaimed that today's classes were over, so the students had to leave the arena. This was an order from their principal. Blade wondered what the stupid bearded man was trying to do. The other girls nudged the boys to stop them from asking unnecessary questions. Arnest was curious to know what His Majesty had prepared for them, but she was sure that it would be something really amazing. But judging from His Majesty's face, the hero couldn't say the same. It was telling him that he was up to no good. A few days have passed since then. Finally, the students could try out the new field. Here they changed the surroundings, made a lush forest, and put slabs on the ground. His Majesty welcomed the boys to their new practice field. Arnest couldn't believe her eyes and asked His Majesty what it was. The man replied that it was for the purpose of special training with a long-lost ancient magic called Naka. The second training arena they usually used was also being remodeled now. Blade thought it was the same thing they used to clone and create artificial heroes. They artificially manifested the power of heroes in people and then duplicated the original. His Majesty stated that there was nothing dangerous here, so the guys could take it easy. They could entrust their bodies to him. With those words, the king took out his list and motioned for them to start. As soon as he pressed the panel, steel tentacles emerged from the plates. One of them touched Arnest's forehead and the girl lost consciousness. After a while, the girl barely opened her eyes. Realizing what had happened, she jumped to her feet. Blade was right in front of her and told her that she was finally awake. Arnest pushed him away and said that he was too close to her face. Redness appeared on her cheeks. The uncomprehending Arnest looked around and asked where they were. Now their area looked completely different and resembled some kind of children's room. She also noticed strange letters above her head and was just going crazy with all the new information. But Blade asked her to calm down. The guy smiled and replied that it probably wasn't a real world. Most likely they were inside a space created by magic or they were under some illusory spell. But everything here was indeed like real life. His Majesty waved his hands and apologized, but it was not an illusion at all. He explained that the students were now inside a virtual reality space. Arnest did not understand what he was talking about. The man explained that it was all thanks to the power of science, which made this place indistinguishable from reality. But they could be sure that their bodies were still intact in the real world. Starting from now on, they will receive real combat training here. The girls didn't realize what was the difference compared to what they usually did and asked a question. His Majesty replied that inside this virtual reality, they wouldn't receive real mortal wounds, so they could give their best just like in a real battle. That is, he meant to say that they could even get at each other's throats. It was primarily a simulated kill or be killed battle. His Majesty didn't understand how they could be shocked by this if they were going to be heroes. Arnest decided that he was right. Besides, even if they were killed, they wouldn't really die for real. It would be like waking up from a dream, so they could take it easy. The girls tried pulling each other's face, but it still hurt. The king said that he had planned it well. He thought it would be easier for them if there were some rules in place. Blade thought it was amazing that Sophie was completely indifferent to all of this. Finally, His Majesty said that they would train on the point system of the Battle Royal. It would be a competition for all of them and the one with the most points would win. For every kill made, the score above their head would begin to increase. They had an unlimited number of lives, so the more kills they made, the higher the score would go. All this would last until the end of the day. Arnest asked to give them at least a minute. The girl replied that they didn't even know how to react to all this. His Majesty asked not to worry, because he would also have a prize for the winner that would interest everyone. The one with the most points would be allowed to freely use this virtual reality. They just needed to make customizations and they will be able to create any world they want. They would be able to make all their fantasies come true. They could be surrounded by beautiful girls and do all sorts of things with them. Or they could enjoy a land of sweets in a world where they couldn't get fat no matter how much they ate. The king hoped that he was now able to interest his students. It sounded very comfortable to them. His Majesty knew that some of them were not happy about this and felt weak for it. This turned out to be mostly the lower class students. Those students with less than 20 points would be punished and the punishment would be expulsion. This was followed by the sounds of a panicking student who was facing obvious expulsion. Now, after all the explanations, His Majesty ordered everyone to disperse and begin their fun. All but Blade and Arnest scattered to the sides. The girl decided that in that case they had to do their best without worrying about killing each other. Since they didn't get to fight properly during the tournament, this was a great chance for them. Arnest offered to have a serious duel with Blade. The guy asked if she really wanted to fight him. The girl seriously stated that she wished it, so he agreed with her. In that case, the king's battle begins. Arnest was instantly near Blade, who managed to block her sword strike. Arnest jumped back and then repeated her attack in the air, but the hero easily deflected it. The guy noticed that his weapon was starting to disappear, and Arnest thought that was the end of it. Blade was swiftly at her back and called the girl naive before delivering 3 slashing blows to her back. The girl's body separated, and the blade said she appeared completely exposed. A few minutes later, the girl reappeared in the arena. Arnest did not like experiencing death at all. Still, she realized how powerful the protagonist was. Somewhere from the bushes of the location, the voices of the other guys could be heard. They wanted to find the lower grade students, catch up with them and get points. It was all for the fabulous privilege of making the men's dream come true. Kasim's partner Clade questioned whether they should have done it, for he didn't really like the idea. Kasim didn't understand why his friend was pretending to be a good boy, and ordered them to go and capture them. The girls came up behind them and asked what they were doing. They thought it was unfair to bully the weak, but Kasim pretended not to understand her. Kasim exclaimed that on the battlefield it was called tactics. In that case, Jessica said that was a tactic too and dramatically lifted her partner Claire's skirt. Kasim and Clade's nose spurted blood from their noses as they got a view of the girl's underwear in front of them. To make matters worse, Jessica was also wearing tight and overly short shorts. While they had their attention diverted, Claire hit the guys with her mace. Her partner didn't understand why she did it, but the girl replied that there was nothing to be done about it, because they had to do it to win. The girls didn't even notice how a huge dragon abruptly appeared behind them. The dragon called the girls by name and told Jessica and Claire that the people were quite tasty. His Majesty laughed and said that it was quite funny. The expression on those children's faces when they panic was very funny. Even though they were just children, if he looked at them too high, they could come back and bite him on one spot. His Majesty's aide approached the man, and after saying that, she handed him a juice with a tube. But His Majesty hoped that she would come to his rescue at this time. She was afraid that they wouldn't be able to do it if it was in the virtual world. From this response, His Majesty laughed and suggested that they look at the blade for now. Arnest's score had been 0 for all time. The hero meanwhile wrote Sophie into the wall and said that even if she could hit him, there was no point since she couldn't hurt him. Arnest didn't understand what kind of super being this was, since even teaming up with Sophie, they couldn't handle him. Blade asked him not to call him that. Arnest offered to count how many times she had died already. Suddenly a voice inside Arnest asked her mistress if she was really afraid of death. The fiery Asmodius offered to try entrusting her body to him. The girl offered to stop with the jokes. She wanted to turn into a demon that would kill everyone. Asmodius offered to do that, but the girl knew that she would be expelled in that case. Asmodius reminded her that she would be expelled if she killed people. Besides, this wasn't a real world, and so there was no problem with that. Or did she want to be killed time after time for the rest of the day? Arnest said she didn't want to die and ended up agreeing with the demon. She reached out her hand to him and they touched fingers to each other. Suddenly, the girl called out to Blade and offered to kill everyone here. After she did that, it would be just the two of them and he would fight her again. The students that were around them didn't understand what was wrong and Blade looked suspiciously at Arnest. He suspected something was wrong. Arnest threw herself into the fray and all the disciples ran back. They screamed that their Empress had gone mad. Arnest killed more and more people and exclaimed that it felt good. Asmodius was also pleased with it. At this moment, the girl realized what an idiot she was, always holding back her power. The hero told Arnest that he wouldn't go that way. After all, she was supposed to control this thing. She surely had to remember that. If she couldn't withstand the power of the sword and turned into a deadly demon that only knows how to kill, he would end it. Blade cut up the girl's body and said that as her friend, he would help her. Meanwhile, the huge white dragon said that the people in front of him were as delicious as Jessica and Claire. But Cassid and Clade were okay too. The dragon shouted that they were quite tasty, and his father would apparently be tasty too. Blade was somehow surprised that the creature was eating people. All the other students were in a panic. They screamed that they didn't want to die and they didn't want to be eaten. They asked to be saved. The dragon was amused to hear the sounds of screaming food. It seemed to His Majesty that things had gotten a lot more interesting since everyone had gone crazy. Although the hero was used to seeing things like that, so it didn't matter much to him. Blade didn't care how the king looked at it, but the situation was clearly out of control, so the guy offered to stop it. The king agreed with him and suggested the guy put a stop to it. He did have some strange tastes for entertainment according to the Blade. His Majesty thought it was all good as long as it made him happy. Now everyone had 20 lives left and the students could go crazy. In that case, the hero decided that he would put an end to it for the sake of all the students. He turned to Kachulin and asked her to bear with him for a little while if she was in pain. Blade used the endless flash skill and destroyed all the students in the radius. At the same time, a mass of slashing blows tumbled over the white large dragon. The dragon's huge body disappeared along with the others. Still, the hero was glad that this was just a virtual reality. Blade yawned tiredly and said he was back. As expected, he was the last one to wake up. The hero wanted to see how the others were doing. Even though they had all escaped punishment, the frequent deaths had driven them crazy, and it would take time for them to come to their senses. This was especially true for the Empress, who could not forgive herself for such shame. She found it unacceptable that everyone saw her terrible side. Kachulin meanwhile apologized to Claire and said that she didn't want to eat at all. Claire asked her not to worry. Since it was so delicious, she didn't mind, but Claire was still pretty scared. The hero hoped they were okay. Kasim was curious to know what happened at the end. He felt as if he had lost all his lives in an instant. By the way, the hero wondered where their bearded man was. The king laughed out loud and said that it was fun. They had all done a glorious job, and thanks to them all he had a good time. More precisely, His Majesty thought it was a good workout for them, all thanks to an idea he came up with. But the students were clearly not happy about it. They could use more patience and strength. Arnest was almost crying looking at His Majesty. Blade was also looking rather gloomy. As the king had said in the beginning, the winner would be allowed to use the place freely, and Blade was the winner. His Majesty asked to go up to him and create the world as he wanted it to be. Looking at the description in the panel, the king grimly said that this world looked pretty creepy. He didn't understand what it was for and assumed that Blade wanted to remember his heroic days. The guy smirked and confirmed it. In that case, the king asked to go and enjoy it. He asked the guy to give him back the panel, but the hero grabbed the king's hand. Blade suddenly declared that the only one who would enjoy the place was the bearded man. Before the king knew it, an iron tentacle touched his forehead. The hero welcomed the king to his top 100 carefully selected opponents in his desperate struggle as a hero. Here the king will be able to experience what he has experienced in the past. Strong enemies that are more horrible, cruel and vicious than words could describe them. The king had to go fight them. The hero stated that the king had an infinite number of lives, so he was in for a day of pleasure from unending terror. The king fell to the ground and thought that was the end of it. The hero assumed that the students were hungry and suggested that they go out to eat. Arnest was curious to know what he had done to His Majesty. Blade smiled and said it was a secret. Chancellor Siren would take care of it, so they could go. The king asked Siren to save him and help him as quickly as possible, but Serena obviously didn't say they couldn't help him if it happened in the virtual world. This time they will leave the king for a while in this world. After that, for a period of time, the king did not even come close to the arena. Today, they were having exhibition fights in the newly opened second training arena. Arnest hit her 5th point painfully when she fell to the ground. She asked the hero to stop and said she was giving up. She still didn't understand how the hero could fight against a demonic sword with a normal sword. No matter how she thought about it, it was too strange. Blade asked Arnest to listen to him. The hero asked in all seriousness if the girl had really gained weight. Her body was not in bad condition, but her movement had become sluggish. In addition, it was barely dodging the attacks that she usually had an easy time with. Arnest thought that it simply couldn't be, but Blade thought she had clearly gotten heavier, and had definitely gotten fat. Arnest could barely hold back her tears and ordered Blade to shut up. He clearly shouldn't have told her that. After this incident, Arnest stopped talking to him, but the guy didn't understand the reason. Girls and guys thought it was 100% his fault, because it was too cruel. No one could believe that he could really say such a thing to her. Of course she would be angry after such a thing. That explained why she hadn't left her room for the past 3 days. It looked like she was going to cut all ties with Blade, but the hero didn't understand what that meant. Jessica stated that she no longer wanted to be friends with Blade and hoped she had made herself clear. But the hero didn't want that and said that he wanted to continue to be friends with her. Blade rushed to the exit and said that he would definitely apologize to her. He probably didn't even know what I did wrong. Thus, he would make her even more angry if he went in front of her to apologize just like that. So the girls said they would go along with him since they were friends. Blade thanked them for their support. Later that night, the hero showed up at Arnest's house. Jessica wanted to make sure Arnest was awake and said that Blade wanted to apologize to her for the recent incident. There was no response, so Jessica asked her friend if she was okay. She warned that they were coming in and opened the doors. Directly across from the window, with her back to them, sat Jessica. Judging from the sobs and shaking in her body, Jessica thought the girl was crying. Because of the darkness, the boys couldn't see anything, but Kachulin smelled something tasty. The girl attacked Arnest and asked to share it with her, because Arnest must have something very tasty. No one saw what was going on there, so the boys hurriedly turned on the lights. Everyone was shocked when they saw this picture. Arnest was gorging herself on sweets. When she realized that everyone else was looking at her, she asked to be turned away. The sweets were so delicious that she couldn't stop eating them. At first she only tasted a bite, but she couldn't stop after tasting something like this for the first time in her life. Blade wanted to ask her about their friendship. The girl replied that he misunderstood. She just didn't want him to see her like that, so she stopped talking to him. Blade was relieved to hear that she didn't want to cut all ties with him. In that case, the guy decided that everything was fine and was about to leave, but the girls stopped him. They said that this was not how it should be at all. He had to say something nice to her, because Arnest had changed beyond recognition. The hero suggested that her sweets were very tasty, and that was great. But the girls replied that that was not what he should have said at all. Arnest replied that it was fine and it was her fault. On top of that, it looks like she brought trouble to everyone and apologized to everyone. The hero asked Arnest if there was anything she wanted to do about it. But if there was anything she could do, of course she wanted to. But now she couldn't even stop eating. She didn't know what to do in this situation, but Blade put his hands on her shoulders and said she would get special training. If she cared so much about her weight, she could just lose it. She would go through a special program to do that. She just should have relied on her friends if she was having a hard time handling it on her own. They would help her with it since they were all friends. The girl looked around at the guys in surprise. Eating another donut, Arnest exclaimed that she would do it and try her best to lose her weight. To begin with, the hero suggested getting those sweets away from her. After that, the girl ran every day. She restricted her eating and did double the amount of exercise and used various methods to lose weight. Eventually, a week later, she saw her result on the scales that stood in the common baths. The girl turned pale, not understanding why her weight was not dropping in any way. As soon as she thought about it, the scales broke right under her feet. The girls thought this was bad, because it was not going the way they had planned. Apparently, it had gotten even heavier, but Arnest did not understand the reason. Jessica said that if her weight hadn't decreased, she must have more muscle now. Her metabolism should have increased and her weight would soon decrease. The girl hoped her friend was right. Jessica said they were all helping her, so she shouldn't get discouraged. The girls began to pummel their friend from all sides. Jessica admitted that she was about to become addicted to that marshmallow body. Claire thought it was funny that she could pinch the Arnest with ease. Arnest screamed throughout the bathing area and asked them to stop. Her screams could be heard even in the men's bathing room. The boys were curious to know what they were talking about. Blade said he could just go and watch if they were that interested. The guys thought Blade was an idiot, but the hero had already left and they couldn't stop him. Blade showed up at the women's bathhouse and asked the Arnest how many pounds they had lost and where they were pinching her. The guy was a little freaked out when he saw a rather lewd and strange picture in front of him. The girl slapped the pervert, not understanding why he was peeping with such an expression on his face as if it was natural. The boys only saw Blade roll on the floor and blood dripped from his nose. The hero didn't understand at all what he had gotten hit for. The guys stated that Blade was a real hero, but Blade said that he was a very ordinary person. The boys were curious to know what he saw. The hero said that in all likelihood, they were there groping each other. Hearing this, Arnest became furious and her friend laughed out loud. The girls told Arnest that the diet was a complicated thing. It would be great if they could burn it all off at once. Arnest thought seriously about their words. The next day, Arnest offered to help Blade with her radical treatment. She only wanted it to be Blade, as she could have harmed others. The hero did not understand what she meant, and the girl explained that she was going to ask someone for help. The guy realized that she meant the very person she was in virtual reality. The girl replied that it would be like a sequel. If they were using different methods, it was worth trying this one too. She took her flaming sword in her hands and decided to get started. Arnest said that if she succeeded and lost weight, he could do it again. The boy looked at the girl questioningly, not sure what she meant. Arnest exclaimed that it didn't matter. She decided to tell him at the right moment and asked him to just watch her. She wanted to count on Blade if something suddenly happened to her. Blade smiled approvingly and Arnest focused on the sword. With the name Arnest Fleming, she commanded her name to take over her body and give her powers. After activating her power, the girl was covered in flames and took on a completely different form. She now looked like a fire demon instead of a normal human. In this form, her body was completely covered in fire. Just as they were practicing, the girls were looking for Arnest and came across the guys. They didn't understand what it was and had never seen an Arnest in this form. It seemed awkward to the hero that now they weren't alone here. The girls asked not to tell them that it was an Arnest. Her friends started calling out for her, but the guy asked them to calm down and just believe in Asmodius. Arnest stated that she was very hot and it was like she was being burned alive. Now Asmodius was sure of this, for her body had already been destroyed once, and now it revealed to her his power of devilish flames. The only one who had ever reached this stage was a first-generation wielder, so Arnest could be proud of that. The girls thought they were hearing two different voices, and it was strange. Blade didn't understand what was happening to Arnest's body right now. The demon explained that the awakening of his powers had turned her body into flames, and it was practically invulnerable. Normal attacks didn't even make sense. This form needed a lot of energy to sustain, so she thought she could burn all the fat at once. Blade doubted that was entirely possible. But there was a downside to this form. She couldn't be maintained for long periods of time due to too much energy demand. She needed about 1,000,000 calories an hour. The girl was absolutely ecstatic when she heard that. Asmodius wanted to know where their enemy was that needed to be destroyed. Blade pointed at the girl and said that he should have rid Arnest of the extra fat. Arnest became furious and ordered him not to call it that. The hero noticed that Arnest's body had fallen to her knees and asked how she was feeling. The girl did not think she was alright. Her mouth was chapped and there was a strong rumbling in her stomach. They usually burned about 2,500 calories a day, or the highest amount 4,000. So if 1 hour takes 1,000,000, then every minute would be like 4 days. Right now, 2 minutes had passed. That meant that right now she was on a week-long hunger strike. Arnest pronounced that her stomach was terribly hungry. The girl began to go crazy with hunger and exclaimed that she wanted to eat. She pounced on the blade and begged for food. The girls started to scatter in panic and asked not to be eaten. Claire exclaimed that she didn't want to be eaten again. They were counting on the blade and the guy asked to get behind him. He took his sword in hand and used the third style of Dragon Slayer. The Dragon Slayer skill was a simple wind pressure, but it should work against the fire demon Arnest. When its attack passed, the Arnest was nowhere to be seen. The girls did not understand what the wind was and noticed that Arnest had disappeared somewhere. There was no trace of her and the girls began to think that she might have been killed by the attack. But the hero reassured them and replied that everything was alright. Arnest was safe and returned to her body. The friends saw Blade holding a completely naked girl in his arms. The hero noticed that she was beginning to regain consciousness. The friends found it surprising that the slimness of Arnest had also returned. The hero sat the girl down on the floor and gave her his sweater. He stroked her head and praised her for doing it and doing a good job. Arnest came to her senses fully and thought that this was it. She remembered that time when the hero touched her forehead and said he was listening to her. Blade asked about what he was supposed to do. The girl blushed and exclaimed that he was too close. She didn't think it would happen this way. Claire was glad that Arnest had finally come to her senses. Everyone was glad that Arnest turned out to be okay. The guys admitted that she had made them worried. Arnest was grateful for everyone's help and also wanted to thank Blade. The girls suggested going to the infirmary for starters. She had indeed lost weight in an instant. Although it was risky, Jessica also wanted to try something like that. Arnest thought that she could use this method many times to lose weight again. 3 days passed and the boys noticed that she was not leaving the room again. Claire thought their friend had made a full recovery. This was despite the fact that it was a good time to show herself to the others as an example. For whatever reason, Blade had a bad feeling about this, but the girls were used to this sort of thing by now. They went to the door of the Arnest again and knocked and warned that they were going inside. Opening the door, they found themselves in darkness again. As soon as they turned on the light, they saw the same picture again. No one was even surprised that Arnest would be sitting there with a mountain of sweets. Arnest noticed the boys and swallowed a piece in a hurry. Anyway, she could get rid of 1,000,000 calories in an instant, so she thought it was fine. It wasn't at all like how an empress should explain herself, but Arnest thought it was fine.